John and Mike, oh here we go. Ready for the Jen and Mike Show. Topics made easy, caught in the flow. Let's dive in with Jen and Mike, yo.
Ever scrolled through those online listings and just thought, is this even real life? I mean, houses going for lottery ticket prices, bidding wars. It's enough to make anyone question if owning a home is even possible anymore, you know?
It's definitely a wild market out there, that's for sure. And you're right, it feels like the traditional path to home ownership is getting, well, kind of out of reach for a lot of people.
Totally. But what's got me really intrigued by the stuff you sent over is it's not even just about the crazy costs, right? It's like the whole idea of what home means seems to be shifting.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. We're going deep on the future of home ownership, looking at how ideas about living spaces are evolving and what those trends might mean for all of us.
Right, because let's be real, we've all got opinions about home, whether it's that dream house we've always pictured or just trying to figure out how to afford rent next month.
Absolutely. And full disclosure, we're not going to solve the housing crisis in the next few minutes. But what we can do is unpack some fascinating trends based on what's happening right now to maybe understand where things are headed.
Music to my ears. So lay it on me. What's the big picture here?
Well, we got to start with the obvious. The traditional real estate market is, well, let's just say it's undergoing some adjustments, right?
Understatement of the year.
But seriously, the source mentions that median home prices have jumped something like almost 40% in just the past decade.
Oof, yeah, my bank account felt that.
Right. Meanwhile, wages haven't even come close to keeping up. So yeah, affordability is a major hurdle for a lot of folks.
Okay, so we've got the classic problem of houses costing more than many people make in a lifetime. But you said there's a bigger shift happening too, right? Something beyond just the numbers.
Yes, exactly. And this is where things get really interesting. We're seeing a rise in alternative living arrangements. And it's not just about being priced out of traditional homes. It's a whole different mindset.
Alternative, like communes and stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I just didn't bring my tie-dye today.
No, not quite. Although, hey, different strokes,
Yeah.
right? Think more along the lines of co-living spaces.
Co-living, like grown-up dorms.
Kind of, but with hopefully less ramen and all-nighters. Basically, it's intentional communities where residents share common areas and amenities, sometimes even meals and social events.
So kind of like a built-in friend group, but for your laying situation.
Exactly. And the source really highlights how this resonates with younger generations. They've grown up in a world dominated by digital connections. So there's this craving for genuine community, for real-life interaction.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like we're wired for connection, right?
Yeah.
But it can be tough to find that in our busy lives.
And that's a huge part of the appeal of co-living. It's not just about splitting rent. It's about combating that sense of isolation that a lot of people feel, especially in big cities. It's like a built-in support system.
Interesting. So co-living is one trend. What else is the source saying about these alternative living situations?
Well, we're also seeing a resurgence in multi-generational living.
Multi-generational? You mean like grandma and grandpa moving in?
Exactly, or adult children living with their parents, or other combinations.
Huh. So it's kind of a move away from that whole nuclear family in a standalone house thing and more of a return to how families maybe used to live.
It's like a throwback. Right. And it makes a lot of sense both practically and I think even emotionally.
Okay, so break it down for me. What's the appeal there? Besides saving money, of course.
Sure. So practically speaking, sharing a home with extended family eases the financial burden for everyone, especially with rising living costs. Plus, built-in childcare, help with chores, all those things have become more challenging when everyone's living separately.
Right, like having extra hands on deck is never a bad thing, especially if you can avoid those interesting conversations with your in-laws about doing the dishes.
Laughs. Exactly. But it goes beyond chores and bills. There's something really powerful about having those close family bonds. It's that sense of community and support that, frankly, a lot of people are missing.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. So we've got co-living, multi-generational living. It feels like there's a common thread here.
Definitely. It's all about challenging that traditional idea that bigger is always better.
Which brings us to, I think, the most extreme example of this whole less is more philosophy. We got to talk about tiny houses. You know, those adorable little homes that look like they belong in a fairy tale.
Ah, yes, the tiny house movement. It's been gaining traction for a while now.
Yeah, and the source had some really compelling arguments for why people are choosing to live this way. So what's the deal with tiny houses? Is it really just about living in a glorified shed?
Well, some people might see it that way. But for those who are drawn to tiny living, it's about so much more than just downsizing. It's about simplifying your life, reducing your environmental impact, and really prioritizing experiences over possessions.
It's funny because for some people, tiny sounds claustrophobic, but for others, it probably sounds like freedom.
Exactly. And that's a key point the source brings up. It's about aligning your living space with your values.
So it's not just about having less stuff. It's about what that lack of stuff then allows you to do, right?
Exactly. Many tiny house enthusiasts talk about how freeing it is to be released from the burden of a mortgage, constant upkeep on a huge house, and the pressure to constantly buy more things to fill that space.
Yeah, I mean, imagine not having to dust those shelves full of knickknacks you never even look at.
Right. And beyond the financial freedom, there's this whole other level of flexibility that the source talks about.
Oh, like being able to literally pick up your house and move it.
Exactly. The source actually tells a really inspiring story about a couple who built their tiny house on wheels, sold all their belongings, and are now traveling the country working remotely.
Wow, see, that's what I'm talking about. That's living the dream. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about how traditional home ownership is becoming, well, let's say challenging for a lot of people. And we've explored some alternative ways of living that are gaining popularity, co-living, multi-generational homes, tiny houses. But the big question is, are these trends here to stay, or are they just, well, trendy?
That is the million-dollar question. And honestly, there are no easy answers.
Right, because as cool as some of these options sound, I'm sure they come with their own sets of challenges too.
You hit the nail on the head. Take tiny houses, for instance. The source points out that in many areas, zoning laws make it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to legally live in a tiny house full-time.
Ah, so even if you're down to live minimally, the system itself might not be on board yet?
Right. And then there are the social aspects to consider. Co-living sounds great in theory, but like any shared living situation, it requires a lot of communication and compromise. Things can get complicated quickly if everyone isn't on the same page.
For sure. You're basically choosing your roommates, but instead of just sharing a kitchen, you're sharing, like, your whole life philosophy, too.
That's a great way to put it. And even with multi-generational living, while there are huge benefits, it requires a lot of open communication and setting boundaries.
Right. Like, what happens when grandma wants to use the living room for her Zumba class during your favorite TV show?
Those are definitely conversations you want to have up front.
Totally. So it seems like no matter what your vision of home is, there are always going to be trade-offs and compromises.
Absolutely. But that's life, isn't it? It's about weighing those priorities, figuring out what matters most to you, and then making the choices that align with that.
I love that. It's not about declaring winners or losers in this whole housing evolution. It's about recognizing the forces at play and starting a conversation.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, by questioning the status quo and exploring different possibilities, we can create a future where home is more about how we want to live and less about what we can afford.
Okay, so to everyone listening, we've thrown a lot at you today. We've talked about crazy housing markets, alternative living arrangements, and even those super cute but maybe not so practical tiny homes. But now we want to hear from you. What does home mean to you? Is it about owning a piece of land, being part of a community, or having the freedom to pick up and go wherever you want? Could embracing smaller spaces be the key to a more sustainable future, or are there other solutions we haven't even considered yet? Hit us up on social media and let us know your thoughts. And hey, if you've got any good tips for finding affordable housing in this crazy market, feel free to share those too. Until next time.
John and Mike, oh here we go. Ready for the Jen and Mike show. Topics made easy, caught in the flow. Let's dive in with Jen and Mike, yo.